So first for SWD, I think that at this point, probably a lot of people who are on this webinar today are familiar with SWD already. And so I'm not going to go into the basic biology of it because we have a lot of other opportunities where we do that. So I'm going to just jump in. You know, if anybody needs a reminder real quick, SWD are the types of Drosophila who can actually penetrate the fruit with their serrated ovipositor. So they penetrate soft fruits, and then the larvae eat the inside of the fruit before turning into flies. And so that's what causes the damage on the fruit. And I'm going to focus on some management practices today. So this chart, this is a result of survey work that Gigi DiGiacomo, she's an agriculture economist at University of Minnesota. Through grant funding, she surveyed a lot of raspberry growers throughout the state of Minnesota through phone call surveys. So she was able to get a lot of information about management practices that farmers in Minnesota are employing. And the interesting thing that came out of that data to me is that growers are not just relying heavily on one tactic. We don't have a scenario in Minnesota where berry growers are just spraying to deal with SWD. Maybe some growers might think of that as their main strategy, but most growers are using multiple tactics together in an integrated approach to pest management. So that's what we call IPM. And it seems like a lot of growers in Minnesota are doing that really well, you know, whether you call it IPM or not. But so if we look at, we have columns for organic raspberry farms and non-organic raspberry farms. And both types of growers are using multiple strategies. So for non-organic raspberry farms, if we looked at insecticide application, about 60% are using or reported using insecticides for SWD. But a lot of organic or non-organic farms are using increased harvest frequency as a way to manage SWD. So I'm going to get into that later about why that matters for SWD. Sanitation, you know, clearing bad fruit out of the field so that those berries cannot serve as a host for the flies to complete their life cycle is very important. Thinning and mowing, mass trapping. Now this one I'm not so sure about because mass trapping has actually not been proven as an effective strategy for SWD yet. And so I'm not sure whether people in Minnesota are actually using that or if we have the same understanding of what that means. Scouting, and then, yeah, nobody reported other practices other than that. So 2.27 average number of practices per farm to control SWD. So I thought that was pretty cool. So why can't we just spray away this problem? Why is this a pest that we can't just use insecticides on and call it a day? Well, one of the reasons is if you're an organic grower or a grower who wants to become more organic, the pesticide options for SWD that are effective are very limited. So basically we have spinosad and pyrethrins, and Trust and Pyganic are two of the main product options for that. As Paul said, he relies heavily on Pyganic and not as much on Entrust. There are a lot of other growers and researchers who will tell you that they rely more on Entrust and less on Pyganic. Conventional, there are a number of conventional products that can be used, but if you actually look at the mode of action of each of those products, there are limited modes of action that are available. So when we think about modes of action, it's important to rotate through different modes of action and not just rely heavily on one in order for us to prevent SWD from developing resistance to these products. So it's important to know that we are limited there. Essential oils may be an option down the line, but there's research going on with those right now about whether or not spraying essential oils can be an effective management strategy on SWD. And some of the research sounds really promising, but there needs to be more work done before we can really make formal recommendations on that. Regardless of what you're spraying, you're going to be spending a lot of money and doing frequent applications of those insecticides. So the other thing is that it can be difficult to harvest when you're spraying so frequently. If you think about the pre-harvest intervals and the re-entry intervals, they can become quite complicated. All right, so I want to talk about daily harvest, and this slide was made by Matt Gullickson, who is a graduate student at U of M in Mary Rogers' lab, and he researches organic management methods for SWD. But this chart on the right, this is from a researcher outside of University of Minnesota, And they found that if the fruit is harvested every day or every 2 days, that fruit contained far fewer eggs and undetectable larvae than if the fruit were harvested every 3 days. Basically, in a nutshell, if you're harvesting every day, you're leaving a lot less time for that SWD to infest the fruit and to become detectable larvae. Another important topic is to minimize habitat for SWD. And so again, there's ongoing research on this, and the more research we do, the better understanding we have of what habitat issues can we actually fix to make an impact on the SWD population. The research is not super clear cut on that right now, but if you try to do things to minimize the SWD habitat, it may work and it may reduce the population and the pressure on your farm. So some things to think about. The first is landscape fabric. This can be helpful for a couple of reasons. SWD might have trouble laying eggs on landscape fabric, but the other thing is that landscape fabric makes it easy for you to sweep or vacuum away those fruit that have dropped on it. And so it's easier to create good sanitation in the field. The other thing that you might do is in high tunnels, that enables you to have bare ground. It also enables you to have landscape fabric that's not going to deteriorate as quickly. But another thing that is more research-based is consistent mowing. So there was research out of Michigan State University that looked at pruning and mowing. I think I have the next slide. In this cherry orchard here, they were doing research with varying their pruning strategies and varying their mowing strategies. And they found that when the grass was mowed more frequently, they had less SWD incidents. So this was an organic tart cherry orchard, so it was a no spray orchard. And aside from the mowing aspect of the study, they also looked at if we prune cherry trees more intensively, will there be less SWD infestation? So they pruned out between 6 to 10 of the larger limbs from each tree every winter. And when 10 limbs were removed, as opposed to 6, they had 80% fewer SWD in those berries. So pruning can be potentially another strategy to think about when we talk about SWD management and just trying to reduce the overall habitat for them. But I think there is still a lot more research that needs to be done on that. All right, another one where, I get a lot of raised eyebrows when I talk about this. But this is exclusion netting. And the picture on the right is of a half-acre blueberry field in Quebec that I visited with some other researchers last summer. And this is a half-acre of blueberries that's entirely under exclusion netting. So that netting is not only over the top, but it's also over the sides and secured near the ground. So no SWD can enter at all, except potentially when you unzip the opening to go in. And so this is actually becoming more common every year in larger berry growing regions of the world. Not so much in the Midwest yet, except that we do have at least one Minnesota grower and at least one Wisconsin grower using exclusion netting for 1 to 2 seasons. So it's just starting to catch on a little bit. So this can look like those big exclusion structures that are just purely net, like I have in this photo, but it can also mean if you have a high tunnel, securing netting to the sides, those side openings of the high tunnels and to the doorways, in order to exclude SWD from entering the tunnels. Exclusion netting can also be secured to caterpillar tunnel hoops. And I think I will show pictures of those in the next slide. And in addition to SWD exclusion, which the farmers who are experimenting with this often say that they have very good success with it and have almost no SWD pressure compared to the outside, there can also be a potential for increased yield, better berry size, better berry quality and marketability, because you're not only excluding SWD, but you're creating this really consistent environment in there where there's less wind, and when it rains and hails, those rain droplets are kind of being dispersed more, and the hail is also being excluded, and so there are other benefits to this exclusion netting as well. The netting itself is 80 to 90 gram netting. Do not use 60 or 70. It can last over 10 years, but it can acquire bird and hail damage over time. There are at least 3 companies that I know of that supply this netting, and there are probably more, but these are just some examples that I have worked with. So these are examples of what exclusion netting can look like. And some people ask, well, can I get a design for how to put this up? And they don't really offer designs because it kind of has to be customized to your particular situation in your farm. So in this picture, this is the berry patch farm owned by Dale Isla Riggs out in New York. She's got it secured to the ends of her high tunnel. And this is also her farm where I've got my cursor here, second to the right, where she's got basically hoops, and the netting is just draped over the hoops. This picture is someone in Wisconsin who just wanted to try it out. So she used a PVC structure, and she's got a secondary entry point. So she can go in there and zip it up and then enter the rest of the enclosure. So it's like a vestibule to add as an extra defense against SWD entering. And then this one on the far right, this is from a research center in Quebec where they just put the netting over single rows of raspberries. So if you're somebody who really just wants to try it out, try out the concept and see if you like it, you could consider something small such as that. There's a lot of research going on SWD right now. There are a lot of tactics that researchers and growers are very interested in trying out. So University of Minnesota, we have multiple people working on this. Lots of other universities like Cornell, Michigan State, Washington State University, and Ohio State, and others. Quebec berry growers and the Canadian government are working on SWD, as well as the Tunnel Berries Project, which is a multi-university project in the US. Some of the types of research that are being funded right now or proposed are the push-pull method, which is where we might try to use more essential oil products to push SWD out and then pull them with other attractive plants basically out of the farm or out of the field rather. New products that have been developed in other places, we need to trial those in the Midwest, such as the sticky substance that the SWD are theoretically attracted to, and then they are unable to lay eggs. Ecotrol is one of the essential oil products that we're interested in trialing. There's also a parasitic wasp. So, this is all pending funding. We need funding in order to make these projects come true. I'm also very interested in trialing exclusion netting in Minnesota because I feel like we need to demonstrate it in order for it to really catch on.